So it's a very legitimate and important question the voters asked that we should respond to on the affirmative without waiting for the question. So, for example, how will it affect individuals? Part of my plan is to expand the child tax credit to $6,000, and in particular to target young parents in the first year of their child's life to make sure they have the resources to buy a crib or a car seat or clothes, because, you know, we know that the vast majority of our parents have a natural desire to parent their children well, but not always the resources. Especially when you also recognize that we did this, which is expand the child tax credit for less than I'm proposing now, but when we did, we reduced childhood poverty in America by 50%, black childhood poverty reduced by half. Part of my plan is to deal with the home health care of seniors. And I tell a personal story. I often go off script to tell a personal story. When my mother was sick, as it turned out she was dying from cancer, I took care of her. And to take care of an elder relative means to try and cook something they feel like eating or can eat. It means trying to put clothes on them or give them clothes that don't irritate their skin, to help them put on a sweater. It means trying to figure out a way to just bring a smile to their face from time to time, to say something that might make them laugh. It's about dignity. And far too many people who are taking care of elder relatives are struggling, because to do that means often they may have to leave their job, which means they're going to reduce their income, or they have to pay down their savings to qualify for Medicaid. So my plan is to recognize this is about dignity and to say that should not have to happen in order for you to have help to take care of an elder. We're going to have Medicare cover it. And I think about this issue also in the context of people who are in the sandwich generation. And that's what we call people who are taking care of their young kids and their parents.
Wow.
And shouldn't have to think about leaving their job or losing all of their savings in order to apply for Medicaid. These are examples. I talk about what I intend to build, which is an opportunity economy, which in large part understands the vast majority of Americans have ambition, aspirations, they have an incredible work ethic, they have dreams, but not necessarily access to the resources that allow them the opportunity to achieve their goals. Unlike my opponent, who thinks about the world differently, I think informed in large part by the way he experienced life, having been served $400 million on a virtual silver platter, which he then filed bankruptcy 6 times. My opponent, who, when he thinks about tax policy, it's about cutting taxes for the richest among us, billionaires and the biggest corporations, who can afford, by the way, to pay their fair share. His plan for what I call a Trump sales tax would be at least a 20% tax on everyday necessities, which economists have estimated the average American will pay $4,000 more a year. So when asked this question about how will this affect my life in terms of a voter worrying about the fact that, look, price of groceries is still too high. I get it, they get it. And what are we doing to help them actually get through life in a way that they're not just getting by but getting ahead? We have to have specific policies that do that. And that is what I offer under what I call an opportunity economy approach. But Donald Trump is offering something very different, including what he's talking about in Project 2025. And I'll tell you, from the biggest rallies I do to church services, people know what's in Project 2025. Right. They know that it would allow corporations to basically stop protecting the right of workers to have overtime pay. What it would do to take away the independence of the Department of Justice. And as we know, he intends to use it to attack his political enemies. People are very concerned by what Project 2025 would do, which is to get rid of public servants who have dedicated their lives to doing public service and instead putting loyalists in these various agencies so that he can have them bend to his will instead of do the work that is in the public trust.